Bowie High School is very well known throughout the state of Texas. Bowie High School in the middle 40s was very interesting for the fact that it was the beginning of my tenure as a Bowie Bear. I started in 1945 at Bowie, and that was the end of World War II, and a lot of our soldiers, our heroes, were coming back from the war, and they were allowed to attend Bowie High School. And of course, they were grown men by that time. Some of them were up in their 21, 22 years of age, and we were all maybe 16, 17, all the way up to 18 years of age. But they were given the opportunity to continue their schooling. I graduated from Bowie High School in 1949 with a good friend of mine, Rocky Galarza. He always the captain of the teams. He was the most popular guy in campus.
I remember the history of this barrio, the Segundo Barrio, as if though it was just yesterday. And the one thing that I remember was sports. I love sports. I love sports then, and I love sports now. And when I was at about the 5th or 6th grade, I used to admire a quarterback by the name of Rocky Galarza.
When I first saw Rocky, I was a young kid. He was a tremendous football player. I mean, Rocky could do anything. He could play baseball. He could play basketball. You named it, and Rocky could do it. Boxing, God, oh man, you know, Golden Gloves. He'd be a champion there. And I didn't know if anyone could whoop Rocky.
The school had a winning year. And Rocky then was a very personable, very popular, very handsome young man.
I think every girl on every corner used to dream of Rocky Galarza. I mean, because that's the kind of guy he was.
Rocky was admired by just about everybody in El Paso.
Rocky was one of those guys that, you know, today you look at him and you would say, what an athlete. I think during Rocky's days, there was probably no athlete in this area, and maybe in Texas, that had the athletic ability than Rocky, because Rocky could do so many things.
And I knew Rocky all the time that we were in high school and afterwards. We became good friends. And he was an excellent athlete.
When I grew up in El Paso, it was a time of when schools were segregated, and I lived during those times in two neighborhoods. As a young kid, I lived in a place called the Six Hells, which were called the Seis Infiernos, not very far from Armijo Park. We left from there and we moved to a place called El Pojido. El Pojido is an area that, to tell you the truth, the police never came through there. Back in those days, they had zip guns and gangs and tough neighborhood.
We were bonded by, unfortunately, poverty. And you might not believe this, but some of us think that in spirit and in pride, we might have been better off then than we are now.
One of the things that I remembered vividly is we were the only black family probably in an area of 2 miles that lived in that neighborhood. And at that point, being about 3 or 4 or 5 years of age, I learned to speak Spanish. Not the real type of Spanish, but the local type Spanish that the youngsters and the kids that were my friends taught me. And I enrolled at Bowie High School in 1955. And at that time, Bowie High School was 7th, 8th, 9th, junior high, all on the same campus. And there I began to excel in sports.
It's history, and I know one thing, story needed to be told, and Josh Lucas. I watched him in other movies, and he's a great actor. I thought he was real good. I think our players are very pleased and proud. You know, it's a heck of a thing.
I think you know you've arrived with Don Haskins when you get the opportunity to ride in his GMC pickup truck. And you're not going anywhere in particular. You're absolutely not going anywhere in particular. You're going to see the entire perimeter of El Paso County. But you know, some of the greatest conversations probably about basketball ever have happened in that truck piloted by Don Haskins.
I think basketball has gone totally back to defense. The old basketball, the Pete Newell, the Henry Iba style of defense first, offense second. The guy I played for, Coach Henry Iba, I put at the top. I think Coach Iba could have coached anything. A great, great coach.
El Paso it's always been a great city for basketball. I tell you, basketball has tremendous history here. I played back in the early 60s when Coach Don Haskins arrived. Basketball was put on the map. If you go back through the history, you know, we started off in a facility that had maybe 5,000 people, and now it's named the Don Haskins Center.
I'm sitting there, and I told my wife, hadn't been that many years ago, that Nolan helped us unload here in El Paso.
Of course, in 1966, they were national champions. That was the only school in the state of Texas, probably at any point, won an outright national championship. He brought in some players that made El Paso so proud.
In 1966, first time ever in NCAA college basketball history, 5 blacks started against 5 whites in the NCAA championship game. Don Haskins was that coach that did that. And so when they beat the University of Kentucky, it was a huge upset. It had a very important part in history.
I think another great thing about Haskins, particularly in this day and age, is what he was able to accomplish was accomplished off the beaten path in El Paso, Texas. Don Haskins started what has become, I think, one of the great traditions in intercollegiate athletics, and certainly you can argue that he's a national treasure as well.
I'm from the Mid-Hudson Valley, New York. In high school, being recruited in this school, University of Texas, El Paso, was one of the schools on my list.
And we were looking for a guard, and one of my assistants kept telling me about Steve Yellen. And we were checking his grades. We were talking about an extremely bright kid.
The summer before I left to college, I went down to New York City and played in some of the city leagues with Nate Archibald, who was an alum of University of Texas, El Paso, wore number 14 here, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. Come and play at the University of Texas, El Paso and wear number 14, which I, in fact, ended up doing.
You know, everybody always wants to talk about the great teams. You know, I had 4 or 5 losing seasons in the 38. That was 2 of them, and they were the most enjoyable. On the team that Steve came in with, I had 3 players, 2 from here and Steve Ben from New York. Well, you know when you got guys that are going to do well, you don't worry about. And Steve was one of them. These guys were trying so hard. By the time they got to be juniors, we won over 20 games. And when they were seniors, we won over 20 and went to the NIT twice. You couldn't work them long enough, hard enough. They never complained. They got better. Fred Reynolds was on that team.
Yeah, I met Steve Yellen back in summer of 1978-79 when I first attended UTEP. And Steve was a very energetic guy and full of enthusiasm and very competitive basketball player. Probably my junior year in college, I had a chance to meet old Russ Bradbury. He came in as an assistant coach. I think this was his first job.
Tim Floyd brought him in from Chicago, and he said, this guy knows everybody in Chicago, all the coaches, what have you. I found out real quick the guy could recruit.
Russ Bradbury was exactly what this program needed when he arrived here in El Paso. I think he learned well at the feet of Tim Floyd, his fellow assistant for several years when Russ first came to El Paso.
I was a forward here at UTEP. And Russ was big on helping us with our ball handling drills. He did a lot of other things, but his main thing, he helped all the guards. He was able to make me extend my game beyond the free throw line.
And it was during that time that we won 5 consecutive WAC championships. But as good a recruiter as there ever was, Tim Floyd was really good, and Russ was right there with him. And
then when Tim left and went out on his own as a head coach, Russ carried on the great tradition that Tim had helped Don Haskins continue here in El Paso, recruiting some of the best players that this program has ever seen out of Chicago. So Russ Bradbury his legacy in this program is a good and a solid one.